Alright, we are live. Oh, what just happened? Still working? Still seems to be working. Alright, so welcome to the stream. If there's anybody in the chat, can you please write if you hear me, if the audio is working? I see green bars in OBS, so everything seems to be fine, but it's just nice to get it double checked. And right off the bat, Lazarus, thank you for the follow. That's really cool. Did the stream alert? Did that work? Was there a thing that popped out on stream? It's like, hey, new follower. I set that up yesterday. I'm good. How are you? How did you find the stream? Did you search for programming on Twitch, or do you follow me on Instagram? I'm just curious. Great, it works. So today we are going to be working on. I have a silly idea for a static site generator kind of thing that I want to do in Rust, and there are plenty of those already. Static site, but I kind of want to. I just first of all I need something to write in Rust, and I thought this was fun. I would like to do some web stuff. I don't want to do yet another JSON API, because I work with APIs during the day, so I don't want to make just another one of that. And a static site generator seems like it's kind of fun. But I would like to. So what I would like to do is have it be as much Rust as possible, while still having the sites or the posts in Markdown. And then I was curious if you could write some sort of procedural macro or a hook into the compiling process, and actually parse and compile the Markdown into HTML at compile time, so you don't have to do that at runtime. I figure you could just do it once for the first request and then cache it, but that's kind of too easy, and I would like to use some of that compilation stuff that Rust can do. And I found a library called Comrack, or rather a crate, which is basically a port of GitHub's Markdown Common Mark parser thing. And Common Mark is the official spec for Markdown. I found a few others, but this one seems to be fine. And they have a few notes about if you really care about performance, this might not be the optimal thing, but since we're doing everything at compile time, it should basically be fine. There was this other one, pull down CMark, but my first impression of the project was really bad, because they don't even tell you how to use it. How do you compile a thing? It doesn't really say, and the documentation was a bit weird. There's no examples in the root module. You have to actually go into this module and this function to actually find out how it works. So I don't know, that's not a very good impression, and I like that this is basically a copy of the GitHub version. So let's try to use that. But the very first thing we're going to do is actually make a project. I have a folder called source hacks, where I basically put temporary stuff, and there's a lot of stuff in here. So the first thing you always have to do when you start making new projects is you have to come up with a name for it. Let's just call it static-ish cargo new. Oh yeah, and what I forgot to mention is it's not actually going to be static, because I have made a blog before where all the posts were written in Markdown, but I found with a static site generator, but I found that it was very sort of cumbersome when you wanted some dynamic features. I can't remember exactly what it was that I wanted at the time. I think I just wanted how many times a given post has been viewed, which you obviously can't do if you just have static HTML files. So we're going to be using the Actix web framework, but it's going to be a very thin wrapper that basically will look at the root and then find the corresponding post or something like that. So that bit is mostly such that we can actually do dynamic stuff if we want. I figure it's gonna be a binary. Let's just call it static static-ish. Static-ish. And so in the past, for like Rust project, I have so I'm using Vim, and I have like a macro or a shortcut set up to like compile the project, and if that works, it just the window goes away. I think that's actually mapped to, yeah, so it does cargo check, and if that passes, then it also runs the tests. And we should end up having tests for this project, so that's fine. But I also like having in like a separate tmux split, I like having like the actual full compile errors so that I can, it's a bit easier to read them that way. And I've been using this tool called Cargo Watch, which basically like watches your current folder, and whenever you change or save a file, it just runs some command, which can be like check or test or build or whatever you want. So I figure at first that's going to be, that's what we're going to use. Cargo watch, clear, x, run. So that means that clear the screen every time, and the command I want you to run is just cargo run. And you can see that it actually did work because it printed hello world. So the very first thing we're going to do is bring in actix, crates, actix. I suppose that's how you say it. It should build. While it does that, let's look at their, let's just pull in this example. And so I have actually used this this web framework actix in another like Tory project that I made a while ago, and I had a lot of issues getting it, just like getting it to run on Heroku. So I figure like I'm just gonna copy over like the setup that I learned that you had to do. Just in here, main. So I think we're just going to leave that commented out for now. Is it working? I have a shortcut called CA. CAB. CAB is just cargo build. So Lazarus, are you familiar with Rust at all? I've been sort of reading a lot about it, and sort of looking for excuses to actually use it. At work, I work in Ruby and Ruby on Rails by day, so I'm like familiar with web stuff, but I don't actually get a lot of chance to actually use Rust. So you got to do that in our free time. So it says we're missing a crate called actix web. So I guess we used the wrong crate. Actix web. Whoops. Let's try that instead. Whoa, learning programming with C++, that sounds like it would be really difficult. I've never used C++. I've written a bit of C during my time in school, and all I basically learned was that I'm too afraid to actually use it. It was just so easy to like make mistakes, and suddenly you have like an exploit in your program. So yeah, C and C++, that's hard. Rust is a bit easier because like the type system and the borrowing makes it really hard to make those like all those kind of like memory mistakes that you would normally make in C and C++. So it did compile. Let's see if it runs. We ran out 8,000. Hello world. So I should now be able to change this. It took a really long time. I have some, so like if I make like a stupid typo in Vim, it says you can't find the create active web. So normally I have like completion and sort of checking into hooked up in Vim, but for some reason it's not working now. Oh, there it is. It's just really slow, I guess. That's cool. Thanks. Have a nice evening, you too. Oh, it's taking forever to compile. Let's just do a check instead. Hopefully that's faster. That's alright. So what this will do is basically it'll look in the environment if there is a port, and then it defaults to 8000, because on Heroku, which I will probably be deploying this to eventually, like the port that you're supposed to bind to is what is in the port environment variable, but I don't have that set up locally, so we just default to 8000. And then I realized that you have to bind to 000 and not like 127.0.0.1. And then we just print the port that we're actually running on. Use undeclared module env. Use env. std-env. And if we run it, how about we make a Vim shortcut to actually run it? Whoops. So in NeoVim, which is the editor I'm using, you can open up a terminal, and then you can give it like some command, and then it runs that command. So I figure we can like bind a key to say term : cargo run, and that should like run the server. And that works. I have too many mappings in Vim. I have whoops, leader. So my leader is spacebar, so we can just bind leader shift T to cargo run. And for good measure, let's just save the current file. So command T runs the compiles, and shift T actually runs the server. And then we can kill it. Okay, so we don't actually... I'm thinking we're not gonna start with the web server stuff, but instead just sort of start with actually like compiling the Markdown files. So let's make a function called run server. Let's put this stuff in there. We could actually put this in. I'm just thinking so we don't have to look at it all the time. So let's make a new module called server RS. Server run. That did not work. So I have this is plugin called Vim Language Server, I believe, which basically hooks into the RLS, which is the Rust language server, which is like a program that runs in the background and does like completion and everything. So that has a feature where you can like rename a symbol basically. And I would like to, since the run server function is inside a module called server, it makes sense to just have it be called run, because obviously it runs the server. What else would it run? But for some reason it doesn't work when it's in a separate module. There we go. So I'm thinking that we should start with like Markdown compilation and stuff. So let's bring in that crate that I was mentioning before, Comrack. And let's kind of see how it works. Use Comrack Markdown to HTML Comrack options. So this is fairly straightforward, right? I would just like to actually see that it works. It's weird that when you if you run cargo check, did that finish? So cargo check has finished, but if you do build, it still has to. Okay, yeah, right. That's because I was thinking why is it doing everything again? But I suppose that there's a difference between when you're using third-party packages. I suppose that running the checking the types, and I just noticed I have not turned on my webcam. What the hell? There we go. Now you can actually see me. That's amazing. It was a long time since I've been streaming. So this worked. What I was wondering was, cargo check downloads a bunch of stuff and seems to compile it, but I guess it doesn't. It just sort of type checks it without assembling the final binary, whereas run then has to do the rest of the work. So notice it didn't download anything because that had already been done by check. But it does actually work. We are successfully getting Markdown here. So now for fun, let's just see if we can get HTML out of here. So that's probably somewhere in the Actix documentation. Flexible responders. Extractors. Documentation. Getting started. So this just returns a plain string. How do you actually have responses? JSON chunk transfer. How do you I just want to send HTML back. So I'm guessing they have some sort of API documentation somewhere. And I believe that I saw that they had a JSON type, Actix Web JSON. So you can do JSON. You can also do HTML. Because it totally, it is plain, it is text plain. Do you really have to set the content type yourself? HTTP response builder JSON. How do you return HTML? Has anybody in the chat used Actix before? They set a content type. Actix responder HTML. This is totally not web framework integration. So this is another library called Mode, which does which is basically a macro for returning or building HTML at compile time, which is really cool. It's sort of similar to what we're doing. Iron Rocket something something. They don't have a thing for Actix. Oh yeah, it's right there. Actix markup. Nothing. Is that because are we in the wrong crate? Is Actix the one that has all the documentation? Markup. No. What the fuck? Ah fuck, that comes from Mode. App server. Markup. Okay, I guess we can just build our own response and then actually set the content type. So there was a thing called HTTP response in HTTP response builder. HTTP response. Okay. So that returns a builder, and then we can call content type. What's the HTML content type? Literally cannot remember. Text HTML. Dot finish. How do you set the body? Body. Body returns a response. I don't think we actually HTTP. I'm not sure that we need to import this HTTP response builder. HTTP. So it was complaining that the function was not called OK. So that works. Let's try to run it and see if it actually works. What do you think, chat? Do you think it's going to work? Ah, we forgot to run on a server. God damn it. Let's try that again. What? Ah, I hit the wrong keyboard shortcut. I was like compiling and not actually compiling and running. Hey, look at that. It's actually bold. HTML, god damn it. So that works. This is how you do HTML, apparently. I wonder if it says the content length is automatically. Let's just look at what it actually sets. So it does set the content length. Content type and date. Interesting. Alright, so it does seem to be working. Now we can actually focus on like compiling Markdown. So what I'm thinking is like this is sort of how you compile a Markdown, but I'd like to wrap that in its own module so that if one day we decide to change our like Markdown library, it's relatively easy to do that. I wouldn't want this like comrag specific stuff like all over the codebase. Let's make a module mod Markdown source Markdown rs, and let's say that it has like one function. Let's just compile. Takes an input, which is a string, returns a string. And it's just basically going to do this. The input is the input. And so we should now be able to do print of Markdown compile and that happened so fast that we didn't even see it. So it does actually compile and print it. So that works. Now I would like to, just for sanity, hook it up to our server. So let's use Markdown. Is Markdown compile hi from Markdown. Then run the server, run the code. Hi from Markdown is actually working. Very cool. So now let's think about how we're actually going to sort of organize this. So normally, let's just first worry about not like worry about doing stuff at compile time. Let's just build some stuff that can find all the Markdown files in a folder and like put all of those into a hash map with some kind of like auto-generated slug or something that represents like the name of the post, and then actually the compile code. So a hash of like a key which will be in the URL and the actual rendered HTML. So for that we need some Markdown. Let's just go to GitHub and find any README. Let's just use one of mine. This is another Rust library that I've been working on. Let's just grab that README. Raw. Let's put in a folder called posts. First post. So how do you actually like find all files within a folder? I don't know. Rust find files in folder. Hey, I've been here before. fs read fs read dear, which has an iterator over the entries within a directory. So that sounds like the kind of thing we want, right? That's what they say is this. Posts. Run it. So it's nice that we can like run it with one command, but it finishes so fast that we can't actually see it. So let's change this here to cargo run and sleep 2. I don't know if that's gonna be annoying. Let's see. Oops. Yeah, so we found one post. Ah, shit. That's because I was again hitting the wrong key. Let's put this on leader R instead. No, let's keep it on leader T and just see what happens. Just wondering if the sleep was still there. Yeah, you saw it exited much faster after printing it. So we are actually getting the first post. So let's make a function called compile posts that returns a hash map of post ID and string. Oh, let's say Markdown. Which means we need to use hash map. So that's in collections hash map. And so we want to do this. Dear posts. So we can worry about error handling later. Technically, I don't like handling. I don't like potentially panicking outside of the main function. I'd rather like bubble results or like errors of some kind all the way up to main, and then let main handle it. But for now, we just need to get something working. So let's just like do this later. Deal with this later, To begin with, I'm just gonna do it a bit quickly. I would like to instead of just like iterating over the files like this and mutating this this hash map, I would like to use the collect function on iterators, which allows you to take an iterator and somehow turn it into something else, which is basically anything that implements from iterator. And from iterator is actually implemented by a hash map. Yeah, so if you have a an iterator of keys and values, you can collect that into a hash map, which I think is pretty cool, because then we have no like obvious sort of mutability. We get an iterator from readdir, we iterate over that, compile each, and then we collect it into a hash map. So the first thing we need is this this post ID here. So I have for the plugin that checks like types and stuff in Vim, I have it set to not highlight anything, but I think it's actually too hard to see when there's any errors. You have to look like out here in the status bar. The reason I disabled it a while ago is that if you have a function that's not used, the whole thing gets highlighted, which is a bit crazy. AL set highlights 1. Need to quit again, I don't know. Still not highlighting. Whatever, let's move on. So a post ID is just a new type for a string. And then this markdown type is just what we're going to return from here. That's just so that we guarantee that the stuff that is in this hash map is actually markdown, not just random text. Let raw markdown, no, compiled markdown. Now it is complaining because our server doesn't work anymore, because it doesn't work with from Markdown. Let's actually deal with that later. To do, like, we don't really care about the server now, right? Markdown. What's it saying? Hash map. EQ is not implemented for post ID. And we should just be able to derive that. EQ hash. There we go. Now you see, now the highlighting is there. Not sure why it wasn't there before. But it is compiling now, but it's just warning us that this function is not used. Let's actually say allow that code for now. That should make these warnings go away. We could of course also just change this to compile posts. Which means we also need to derive debug. Markdown cannot be formatted. Derive debug. So now we need to actually see what this read dir returns, right? So it returns a result read dir. Read dir, iterate over the entries of a directory. Yield instances of IO result read dir. Dir entry dot path. So that's the file path. Then we need to read it, and I believe there is a function called read to string. Fs read to string. Whoa. Huh. Okay, I can't actually select this. Content path, and that returns some sort of result string. Expect hail to read file. Also change this. It's just so that if we actually get an error, we'll know sort of where it originates, instead of saying try to unwrap a none. That's a bit annoying. I do have like the backtraces enabled, but it's still a bit weird. So this works. We're not actually doing anything with the contents. Let markdown equals markdown compile contents, and then we can say, alright, did that not work? Nope, because it expected a borrowed string, which is fine. And then we can insert, we need the ID. Let's just let that be the path for now. I'm thinking that in the, within the markdown source, we need some special ID attribute or something at the very first line that we can parse out, because it can't be the file name. I mean, it could technically be the file name, but what if we accidentally change it, then we break all the links? No, I think file name is fine. We just have to remember not to change stuff, which is fine. Insert ID markdown expected string found a path buff. Does that have an into? Path buff. It's string lossy. Let's see if this is replaced. To stir. Why would it fail? This conversion may entail doing check for UTF-8 validity. Is that if you have emojis and stuff like that in your path? No, because emojis are allowed in strings. Or I guess some file names might not be UTF-8, which is fine. String. So this returns a stir and not an actual string, so we'll have to convert it. path value moved here. And there we go. Now we're actually compiling. Whoops, I did it again. Wrong command. So there is a bunch of Markdown there, and also some let's try to see if we can return this from our server. For now, let's just move all this in here. Let's say let body posts and Markdown. We have to like strip off the file name at the end, but this will do for now. And so it should complain that it can't actually turn this Markdown type into HTML, but that's fine. Doesn't have a known size at compile time. So that's the like disadvantage of having a small screen, because I might not see the first error. And the most obvious error to fix is just the fact that FS is not included. And I'm missing a comma. Hash map not found. Yeah, so now it is actually complaining that like so first it expected a post ID. That's fine. And I'm also expecting it to say that it can't actually turn. It's expecting a reference. Come on. There we go. Now we only have one error, and that is that you can't turn a Markdown into an ActX binary. However, it is implemented for string, which means that we can probably implement from pretty easily. Let's open ActX Web and let's say, what's it called, binary? ActX Web binary. From string for binary. Let's just see how they did that, and then we can just steal it. So we need ActX Web binary. Markdown. No, implement from Markdown for binary from. I can never remember how from works. It takes an owned thing, right? Yeah. From Markdown self. should do it, right? And it does. Let's move this down. What we really care the most about is this function. What's it saying? Can I move out of indexed content? Consider using reference instead. Oh yeah, that's right. So the issue is that this posts thing is a hash map, and when you do a lookup, it returns a reference to the thing, because the hash continues to own it, which means that we can't apparently give it to body. I'm wondering if we can say. So for now, we can probably implement clone, which is easy because we can just derive it. So that works. Let's run it. What? No entry for key? What the hell? Where's it? Where's it failing? Arbiter. Panicked at no entry for key. Is that because like this is in a subfolder? So we need to go one level up? Is it because it can't find the file? That's super weird. What the hell? No such file or directory. I'm just wondering, like, which directory are we in then? P unwrap. I basically just want to like print out each thing in the current directory. So this looks like we're in the root, right? So that means that it's relative to where we run the command. So that it is in /posts. Let's just print the path. So usually the way it works with this is that there's someone in the chat, that's at least my own experience, there's someone in the chat who's just like screaming at their computer, "No! You're obviously missing a semicolon on line 5. So really, if there's someone in the chat who knows what's going on, please let me know. No entry found for key. Of course. That's because we're using the square brackets instead of get. I actually prefer using get, just because you have to actually unwrap it. So square brackets will just panic, whereas get returns an optional, and then we get to unwrap it ourselves. And now I think we're gonna get didn't find post, because notice the post is not called Markdown RS, it's called first post. Yeah, panic that didn't find post. So the post is called first post. Yep. And this silly business, we can not do that. Now what? Panic that didn't find post. What? Ah, first post RS. Let's do it this way just to be totally sure. So in Vim you can hit Control X, Control F to search for files, and then you can like keep doing that to like drill into directories, which is super nice. So now I'm really sure that this is the name. However, I might be proven wrong. I often am. What the fuck? Am I going crazy? What are the keys? The key is post ID post. Oh my god, it's the full path. Wait, what was it? So the path that we're looking for is /posts/first post. If this works, it is amazing. No! Yes! And we actually have HTML, we have code, links work. That's amazing. We don't have syntax highlighting, that's fine. I would actually like to leave that to a JavaScript library, or figure out however they do it on Cargo Doc. But this is great. Something's actually working. So now I would like to clean it up a bit. So I'd like to like remove this, like clean up the keys basically. And so what I figure that we should do is, instead of constantly running the server and switching to Safari, I think we should just write some tests for this. So let's do that. Let's make let's actually put in the Markdown module. Let's move this stuff in here. Because we don't want, we might still need this for like a test, right? Basically, we just want stuff to compile. We're not using HashMap. We're not using FS. We're not. We will be using Markdown. Let's nuke it for now. Let's remove these. Where is it complaining? I wish in Tmux you could have different font sizes in different splits. So I would like a smaller font size over here for errors, and a larger font size here for code. I don't think that's possible though. Markdown 28. Stir does not have a known size compile time. Use of undeclared module fs. Use fs. Turns out that's all we needed. So now let's actually do the thing that we talked about before. Now let's first write a test and then get that test passing, and then we can begin actually refactoring this function. This terminal, no, that's iTerm for macOS. I've tried, how do you say it, Alacrity, but for some reason like the fonts look wrong, or you had to customize it or something like that. I don't know. And I like in iTerm you can set it to a full screen window without it being like the native macOS style full screen where it like has its own pane. I like that in Tmux, or in iTerm rather, you can just have it like be in the background, which I think is really cool. I don't know if Alacrity can do the same thing, but I definitely see the appeal of an editor, a terminal written in Rust. Okay, so tests. I have a macro for that, so we should actually be able to run the tests now. And I just noticed that this window got all fucked up. There we go. I should have some way of automating this, but I don't. So it runs and it fails if we change this to a 1. You have scrolling issues. Like, is it slow or what happens? It's like I usually scroll with like Control U and Control D, and that works just fine even for like large files. But I think I have had like issues in the past, I'm not sure. So the test can pass. Let's move this stuff into it. So I figure it would be nice if when we were actually done and we had the real posts, then we could sort of have like a test directory that we could use for test posts, basically. So we should have some way of like customizing this. Yeah, I do the same. I also do a lot of like so like Control U and Control D to go half pages, and then I really like CC or ZZ to actually so like the line, like if I'm on like this unused imports line, if I hit double Z, it centers that line to the middle of the screen, which I use a lot. And you can also use, I believe it's ZT and ZB to like move your view of the file without actually moving the cursor. But I use ZZ a lot. What were we doing? Yeah, so I would like to be able to pass in test posts. Test posts. I basically want to make sure that it actually something actually works. So we just need a short post here because we're going to be asserting on what the actual compiled body is. So we compile the posts, then we currently get it with test post. Let's make totally sure this time. Oops. And then we can assert that the body is, what would the compiled markdown of that be? H1 test? I guess so, right? Let's just run it and see what it says. Expected 0 parameters, that makes sense. I would like to have this somehow be like have a default. So if I don't pass in here, or maybe like I pass in a none, or I have a struct with some configuration option that implements default or something like that, so that we can just in our server we can just call compile posts, and it'll just figure out where they are. Maybe you can do stuff like tell it that you're actually in test mode, and then it looks at a different folder. I'm not sure, but I notice right now that I say that users look in test posts. That's not actually true. It is in test post, but that's kind of weird. Let's rename it test posts. Posts. Binary operation equals cannot be applied to type Markdown. That's because it is not partial EQ or EQ. So here we're comparing a Markdown to a string, which doesn't work. And this Markdown type expects a string in the constructor, and currently what we have is a string slice. But I figure we can just implement another from type from Markdown. So you can say from from string for Markdown from text start Markdown. Did you mean Markdown? It's text. Do you have to do something like this? It's basically it's complaining that we don't have a lifetime here. That works. I was a bit worried that it was going to force us to use static or do some other crazy things. So it says we're missing a line break at the very end. I guess that's fine. Alright, now it should work, and it does. Great. So now we can actually begin sort of refactoring and changing this. The very first thing I would like to do is I would like to not look this stuff up by including the path. I should just include the file name, and then we can deal with the extension later. Oh yeah, and by the way, I totally forgot before. Thanks for the follow, Del1K. I guess that's how you say it. Thank you so much. That's really cool. I want to start streaming more, so if you enjoy my stream, definitely follow, so you'll get those sweet notifications. Didn't find post, as we'd expect. So this is the path. Whenever I'm not totally sure what type something is in Rust, I think it does. Yeah. So I have like the RLS plugin for Vim set up, and the Vim language server plugin has this hover function where you can basically get type information about a variable. But what I used to do in the past, before I had that, I would just like say let something of type empty tuple equal path, and then I would just like look at the compiler error and see what it tells me. So this is that it expected empty tuple, but it got a path buff. So that tells me that this variable is in fact a path buff. But this hover is really cool. Guess you have to save the file. It's a bit flaky sometimes. It doesn't work. There we go. So here it shows that it is a path buff. And Volatile Majesty, thank you for the follow. Path buff. Basically what I need is not the whole path, but like just the file name. As path. Courses to a path slice. File extension. I know that in Ruby it's called like base name or something like that. Is anybody in the chat who's familiar with it? So there's, I see components, which is probably like an iterator of like each thing in the slash. We could take the last one, that file name. There it is. Very nice. File name returns the final component of the path if there is one. Great. So we had to call. What do we have to call? So we call as path. As path. Dot file name. Expect what did file name return? It returns an OS, but this is a dir entry. Path. Oh, there is already a file name on the path buff, so we don't need to convert it into a path. And it returns an OS string, which implements to stir. Is this right? Hey, look at that. It was correct, and the test actually passed. It's rare that you make a bunch of changes, and first time it runs and compiles. Or rather, the test pass, and it compiles. But this is cool. So now we would like to do it without the extension. Because like I figure that like our URL is going to be something like get, I don't know, like posts / post, or like first post, or whatever it was called, right? And then we need to map this to actually to the relevant file name. And I guess we should also handle duplicates. No, that's handling the fact that they are files, so we can have duplicate file names. But this should definitely fail. Yeah, didn't find post, which is exactly what we wanted. How can you remove the extension? So there is an extension method. With file name. I suppose we could just like cut off the extension. I think that's actually what we're going to do. I'd just like to move this out here so we can like look at it a bit easier. Same failure. So let's say let file name be this stuff. Let's not worry about this for now. Let extension. Extension is very similar, right? Except for file name. We call extension. No extension. And then we just want to like can you do this? Replace. I believe that's a thing. Trip out, stir, fin root. I thought replace was like a function on strings. Stir replace. Stir replace all new. Oh yeah. Wait. What does it actually say? Trade FN char. type is this? What the hell? Required because the requirements of the info of city ops FN root. Why the hell does this not work? Place. Wait, what? Where did all the like function names go? Replace. Wait, alright, it's right there. I was just confused because there's like a bunch of stuff above. Must use. That's weird. This returns or replace strings in your allocation without modifying the original. Examples. Is that because we just need to borrow that thing there? Yes. Oh my god. Sometimes the compiler messages in Rust are great, but sometimes not so much. Like this message made no sense. Like there's no closure anywhere here. What the hell are you talking about? Sometimes you just like try putting ampersands in places and see if it works, and sometimes it does. Didn't find post. What are the keys? Posts keys. Post dot. Great. Place. Format. There we go. So now we're successfully able to find it under the post key. I was thinking before I would just like to fix this a little bit. I would like to just have it be from this, which we can very quickly do. It's basically another one of these. I wish that, does anyone know, is it possible to like derive from string? Can you do this? Since that would be super cool. Oh, syntax error. Can't do that. From stir from take a for post ID So that's nice. We can actually fetch stuff out and we get the compiled results. What should we do next? Can we clean this up? I was wondering if we could like turn it into strings at the very end. And if these like OS strings somehow you can use them the same way, I'm not entirely sure. So to begin with, let's remove this type annotation. That's not necessary. Let's say if we can just use the file name, that would be cool. OS string doesn't have replace. Can it be formatted with the default formatter? Doesn't seem that we can. Can we get by with slices though? Seems so. Yep. So that's cool. This is a bit nicer, right? And again, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to deal with all these like errors later. For now, I would just like to get something that actually works. So I suppose the next thing is to actually somehow generate it at compile time, right? So like somehow turn this stuff like into a macro and actually do that at compile time. Although how will that work? So would you generate like a constant or like a type for each post? And then how would you actually do the lookup? So you do definitely need some sort of hash, but I guess you could generate that function at compile time. Oh yeah, one thing I just noticed, we definitely don't need this clone anymore. And this is HTML. Just notice that like having this return Markdown doesn't make any sense. It doesn't return Markdown, it returns compiled Markdown. That's just a really long type. Compiled. We could also call it like HTML, but Actix probably has an HTML type already. And basically what we want to verify is that you're actually calling this function, not just like returning random strings, right? Okay, I figured the next thing we can actually do is somehow like hook this stuff up to the main function and actually make like a dynamic URL that we can actually call. Something like this. So let's say that, let's just say use Markdown all. Post. hub. It's complaining about some conversion. What the hell? Use of undeclared typo module post ID. Compile Markdown is not implemented for Active's web binary, but it is though. Is that because I'm not using it explicitly? Because you can't like make that public. And compile Markdown is a public struct. It's probably because we're not using the Active's web binary. What? Yeah, okay, cool. It's because there's an ampersand here. Which means we can't do it for borrowed compiled markdowns, but we can do it for owned ones. Which means we need to clone it. That works. So use of undeclared type post ID. Should be able to do a glob import here. The binary should not be necessary. Right, that works. So the reason that I thought we had to import binary here is because usually to use the methods from a trait, even though they're like implemented on some other type, you still need to use that trait. But the from method is not implemented on binary. It's just imported automatically from the standard library. So we don't actually need this trait, which is great. Markdown star. What? I'm just curious why it's complaining that Markdown star is not used. Oh yeah, I've seen some issues with the Rust language server where it's like the error messages are wrong or out of date, or it's using a different version of Rust, or its configuration is weird. Because like you can see it compiles just fine. Yet for some reason it like keeps the highlight there. So let's just verify that this still works. It should. Once the server reboots. We haven't defined that one. Didn't find post. That's because it is called first dash post. That was basically the issue we had before. What? Okay, it's been a long day. So this function takes the name of the directory where the posts are located, which is posts, and this is the ID, which should be first post, like this. What do you think, chat? Is it gonna work? And it does. And now I would like to say posts first post, which means we need to somehow configure this router thing. That was in the README. I remember slash posts resource. So we've basically defined slash posts with which takes like a dynamic parameter there. And I just noticed now this function is called greet. Let's just call it show post. Then how do we actually fetch it from the params? It seems to be something like this. Post ID, match info get post ID unwrap expect no post ID. So one thing that I actually do quite often in Rust is sort of like make one variable that's like part of a result that I want, and then make another variable with the same name that just like uses the previous one. So like, you see this, we could write this like so, right? But it's a bit hairy to read. I actually find that like this stuff reads nicer. And if also it's easier if like you want to check out what like the type of an intermediate variable is, right? And this is totally cool because like the Rust type system helps you here, because you're not gonna accidentally like use post ID down here and think that it's this value, because usually the types are different. So I found that's sort of a neat little pattern there. It did compile. Let's see if it works. Posts, first post, and it actually does. And if we get one we don't, that isn't there, it currently just panics. We just are gonna somehow map that into a 404, but it actually works. Look at that. So we could now look into actually making this nicer and like styling it and stuff like that, but that's like HTML and CSS, and I personally find that pretty boring. So I would like to instead explore like doing all this compilation stuff at compile time. What I basically want to end up with, I'm thinking, is like a module where each post is its own type, so that like actually getting posts is type safe. We just need to somehow like get it from like a dynamic name, right? Which I think is fine. So in the interest of taking like small steps, I figure what we can start to do is make like some sort of like a const up here that actually has the compiled, like the one compiled post, and then we can sort of slowly move from there to see if that's even possible. And I think we are going to use the lazy static crate, which lets you basically do like dynamic stuff and then put the result of that in a constant. Let's just move this up here. this. Post. It is compiled Markdown. No, it is a hash map of post ID and compile Markdown. Compile Markdown. If I could just type. Hash map not found in the scope. I want automatic imports for SCD. That would be so nice. Hash map. So that compiles. This is technically posts. Should be able to do that now. We are. See if it still works. And it does. Wait, what were those? Didn't find post. That's weird. Never mind. So now we would like one type for each post. So I've done like a bit of like compile time macro stuff before. I have a crate. I have a few crates for this. Browse. So I have one crate. Enum each variant derive that just like if you define an enum, then it'll derive a method called all variants that just returns a vector of each variant basically, and that works of course only if they don't have parameters here. So I've delved a little bit in stuff like this, and it's actually pretty cool. So what I'm thinking is that we're going to have some sort of, because like the other sort of type of macro in Rust is like the macro rules stuff, right? But that doesn't actually let you run code. It just kind of expands into actual Rust code. You can't like run code at compile time. So if you look at this one, what you do is you basically make a special crate that ends in -derive. I think it actually has to. And in your and then in your TOML file, you say that it is proc macro true, which means that it has procedural macros. And then you can export. You can like make a special function that will basically be called when someone say derive each variant. And then from here you can basically generate Rust code using this like quote macro where you can put Rust stuff in there, but then you can have like dynamic names in here. So it's sort of similar to how you would make like normal macros. But I mean this is like normal Rust code that's just invoked during compilation instead of after when you run the code. Which means that in here we can like do file I/O and compile stuff and do whatever we want. We could even like make HTTP requests if we wanted to, which is kind of neat. So I think we're gonna look into this, but this means we need a new crate. I remember Rust custom derive. I remember there was like a nice, simple procedural macros and custom derive tutorial on how to do this. Is it in the book? Second edition book. Derive. Search. Derivable traits, procedural macros for custom derive. Yeah, so let's just kind of use this and go from there. So we need a new crate. Because I don't think a crate, like you can't have procedural macro crates and normal crates in the same, crate. I suppose that's because Rust needs to know that it has to compile all the procedural macro stuff first before it can compile your normal crate, so that it can compile, like call your macros while it's compiling the other crates. I would assume that's why. But that means we need a new crate, and you can actually just put them in the root, which is cool. We could also make a cargo workspace, which is where you have like several crates that like combine into one, sort of. But I've experienced that fucks up like autocomplete and stuff like that. We can always move stuff around, so let's just start with a new crate here. Cargo new lib. And it needs to end and derive, right? A custom derive procedural macro. It's called food derive. So let's just call it static-ish derive. And then we need like this stuff. So like syn, I believe, is like syntax, like a parser for Rust code, I believe. Yeah, that gives you like the AST of like the struct that your that the derive was defined on. And then quote is for, I think, actually like generating the Rust code. Quasi-quoting. Yeah, I think that's for actually like generating the Rust code. Oh yeah, one thing that I totally forgot is that I don't actually want this like on a struct. It doesn't really make sense to like put a derive on a struct and then that generates like new types. That's kind of weird. But what I noticed that Diesel does, Diesel code gen, which was really cool, is they have a macro called infer schema. Diesel infer schema. Throwing away infer schema. So Diesel has something like this, where what they have is basically a macro called infer schema that expands into like a dummy struct that has their derive on it, which then triggers their code generation, which I think is really cool. So I would like to see if we can do something like that. What the hell? Diesel. That is not helpful at all. DSLRS, PI docs, infer schema. Why isn't that here? Which crate is in diesel infer schema docs? Infer schema. Whatever. So this is sort of what they do, where they have like a dummy module with like a dummy struct, and then they have a derive on that, and then they sort of like they have a use for that then, right? So let's see if we can do this. Let's start by not having a macro at first. Let's just put this in our code. Let's first see if we can build this. Basically what I want to do is like put something like this in our previous example, just so that we can see it fail. Markdown. Let's have all this in a new module, posts. Let's call this mod. Something like this, right? So now it complains that the compile posts macro doesn't exist, which is cool. Is that how you do it? I'm just wondering, like, how do you set up like a local crate? It just seems wrong that like this is red. Yeah. So that totally works. And then I guess we have to say extern crate static ish derive, and put a macro use on that. Static ish derive, can't find crate. What, do we spell it wrong? Static. What's it saying? No package name. Ah. There we go. So now our goal is for actually to get this to compile. Which it doesn't, which is good. So let's see how to actually do it. So we have prog macro, we have sin quote. Let's start by just copying this stuff. What do we call it? Compile post? I have already forgotten. Source post. Yeah, compile posts. Compile posts. MacroDerive takes a token stream. Impl So now we at least have something that compiles. Now we can just like actually try to modify it. So let's think about what it is that we sort of want it to expand into, right? Posts. So we have this compile function. We have this this function. That returns us a hash map of post IDs and compiled Markdown. We kind of need this in this other crate, right? So yeah, we actually need the compilation here in our derive crate. So let's let's move it over. Let's remove it from here. So, it's annoying. We have a bunch of stuff in this server now. All this goes away. Use of undeclared type env. So we don't need lazy static anymore. We also don't need Markdown. We do over here though, we do want mod Markdown. Sorry if it's a bit hard to keep up with all the windows. Source Markdown RS. It's a bit annoying that we need Actix here just for the binary. But we kind of do because we can't implement it in the other crate. Should technically be able to remove comrack here, right? Also nuke this file. Okay. Let's focus on actually getting this to work. Comrack. Actix web. Waiting to compile. Thank God for incremental compilation though. If we had to wait like this every time, that would be insane. Some of my Android developers at work, or some of the Android developers at the place where I work, often complain about their slow compile times. It's gotten better, I believe. I haven't done any Android development, but supposedly it used to be really bad. Tokyo. Oh yeah, that's Actix. Checking. Is it actually running? God damn, there's a lot of crates. Is that Actix that has all those dependencies? I remember I saw a cool crate, I think it was Cargo Graph? It could like, yeah, Cargo Graph. It could like generate like a dependency graph for a crate, which was really cool. Could be interesting to do that on this project just because like, there's so much stuff. Is it compiling everything again? I'm confused. Actix derive. So chat, what do you guys usually do while you're waiting for things to compile? So I work in Ruby day by day, where we don't have, it's an interpreted language, so we don't have to wait for compiles. We do have a wait for like tests to run and stuff like that. What, is it checking again? What the fuck is going on? That is the strangest thing. So it says it's running cargo check. Checking Unicode normalization. What? Anybody in the chat who knows what's going on? Why is this so slow? Okay, so it is actually doing stuff. We can also see that like Rust C is pretty high up. I saw it just before. I wonder why it has to compile everything twice though. But now it should be pretty fast. Right. So our goal is to figure out what we actually want to derive. So I figure we could make some like struct, pub struct, first post, and then have like impl first post. And then basically have a function called ID that returns a post ID, right? And then we could also have one that's like HTML, which returns compiled Markdown. Compiled. I don't know what's going on with my auto completion. Sometimes it doesn't want to complete stuff. Something like this. I think this would work. And then we could also, like, we could include a lazy static that had, where did it go? Lazy static. Whoops. Lazy static. Then we could include, like, also generate some sort of lazy static. Whoa, shit, I just quit iTerm. Are we on the right? Like, that's literally one of my favorite features of using iTerm, is that when stuff, like, if you accidentally quit your terminal, you don't lose all your windows, you just reattach to the terminal session. Have something like this, right? Whole posts. That is like one of these hash maps. Like, we'd somehow have to generate this, like, all this code at compile time. Although, do we even need the types? Do we need the custom types? It almost seems like way overkill. But a lazy static won't work either, right? What I was thinking we could do and then, like, map insert something like this, right? That just sort of defeats the entire purpose. No, because, like, this guy would return, like, a literal hard-coded string. It wouldn't do anything dynamic, because this method would be generated at compile time, right? I think so. I don't know if this is a good idea, and usually if you just, like, start working on it, at some point you will, like, realize that, like, the flaws in your design. So I can't say if this is going to work out. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna, like, do it and then see what happens. So the very first thing we need is I will just open. So this is the sort of code that we need. I'll just keep it here for reference. And so the way that you derive stuff is you have this quote macro. And in here you can, like, have Rust code mixed with these, like, pound sign variable names, and these variable names just need to somehow, you need to somehow be able to turn them into Rust code. So what I think we can do is you can say how does that work? FN. I'm thinking if we can like pull this guy into its own thing. Let a function quote so that's not. Wait, what? Is it running the tests? Ah, yeah, it's running the Markdown tests. Oh my god. Let's just let's nuke these for now. I have faith in the compiler. So I'm just a bit curious, like if we put like gobbledygook here, does that actually work? Yes, that does work. So we need to somehow have a test for it. Which means that we need a posts directory. Which means that we might as well keep those tests. So we can just move test posts in here. We also need posts, right? Because I figure that what we need is some sort of integration test that actually calls this macro, actually calls this derive. Yeah. So I can never remember if the folder that you're supposed to use for integration tests is called integration test or integration tests. Out here. Just integration testing. Test organization, test private function, integration tests. We create a tests directory. Right, and then in there you just have top level functions annotated with test. Test/integration. And then this guy has a macro use static ish derive and a test. I like to just like see the test fail first, so I don't like get the impression that it's actually working when it's really not. Hey, so you see, we should see it fail, right? That's probably because the file needs to end in _test. What? What is literally going on? The tests directory. Test. Come on. Maybe this is a sign I need to go to bed. If there's people in the chat and you notice stuff like this, just let me know. Saves us both a lot of trouble. That fails. Can I run it from this as well? Yes, good. So now I should be able to replace this with 1 and have it work. So what I want is, why do we have tabs now? Tests. Test. Huh? Yeah, I had the same folder twice. I guess I duplicated it instead of copied it. No, instead of rename it. So this should fail. Sometimes it's good that you have tests and a compiler to tell you when you're stupid. And that passes. Alright. So what I would like to be able to do is say so let's make a macro rules called compile posts that expands into this, and then let's call it and so what I'm wondering is, can we put this macro over here? Because I believe that derive these like procedural macro crates might only be able to export these. Like, you can't export other things. Yeah, right. Cannot export macro rules macros from a proc macro crate, which is annoying because it means we need this crate like in our other, like in our root crate. I say crate a lot, but for now we'll just leave them in our tests. So it's correctly working. It's saying that it can't find the compile posts custom drive, but we wrote it right there. We have a macro use. What if we ignore the macro for now? Derive compile posts. Can't find trait. Hello macro. Alright, so that's in the code that we're actually generating. Let's just make a function instead. So that works. Can we stick this in our macro now? Still compiles. Great. So it compiles the posts. I imagine that, like, at some point I would like to say like which directory to find the posts from in this macro, and then like make this an attribute or something like that here. I'm not quite sure how that works, but we can always like look at that later, right? So for now, let's just hard code the testing directory. So let's just think, how do we actually want to use this? let's say let post equal first post. First post. Yeah. And then let's say that assert IQ EQ and post ID. So it was just post. Post is post ID, and that the HTML is h1 test h1 new line HTML. See, that's really annoying, because we need, in our tests, we need the types and stuff that's defined in our Markdown. How do you do that? Does that mean we need a third crate? Because we need the actual like Markdown compilation in this crate. Our other crate doesn't need it, but it needs the types as well. So the easiest, like nastiest fix, is just to not make our own like post ID types and just use strings. I just prefer keeping it, like keeping that level of type safety, right? And we could pull it into a third crate. It would technically not be hard to do. It's just, what does, I'm wondering if we can like see what Diesel does. The problem is just like they have so many crates. Tests, migrations, derives, compile tests, CLI. I think can the Diesel derives, what crates does it depend on? So it depends on Diesel. But Diesel derive, does it also depend on? It probably doesn't depend on CodeGen, right? No. It also depends on Diesel derives. Can crates like refer to each other? that possible? I know the modules can refer to each other. Let's get this crate to compile first. So now we're in the root and we're going to build that. Which is super slow. Is it done? I'm just wondering if it's like using all the cores. It does seem to. Okay, so that crate compiles. What if in our toml file we put static-ish does it compile now? Unable to update. Failed to read. Yeah, there's a cycle. How do they do it? Diesel derives. Where is first schema? Is it diesel? I'm basically like trying to figure out where the code is like defined. No code matches first schema. So that might be old docs that we're actually looking at. So what I think we should do is just actually clone the source and just have a look for ourselves. These lower ASICs. What? Thank God for fast internet. I should not have said that. Here we go. Some crate. Diesel infer schema. It's in its own crate. Which is not here. I guess because they're like deprecating it or something like that. Diesel infer schema. Provides fucking for a further schema of a database. Whose GitHub is it on? Diesel RS. Diesel, am I blind? Wait, what? Diesel infer schema. Repository is diesel. How though? I literally don't know what's going on. Where does this crate live? Maybe it doesn't live on master anymore? Diesel infer schema. Is it deprecated? May 2018. Maybe they've just like stopped supporting it or something. That's super weird. That means I'm not quite sure how to do this. I think we need a third crate. Like one that actually has the like markdown stuff in it so that our tests can refer to that as well. It's a bit annoying having to have 3 crates for all this stuff, but I think we gotta do that. I think that's the only way to do it, because like, so our tests need these types, but this crate can't export it. Can't export those types. So say new, cargo new, lip, static-ish, markdown. And pop mod markdown. No. Static-ish markdown. Can't find crate static-ish. That's because it's called static-ish markdown. So now it actually compiles. We probably can't run the tests yet though. What's it say? Post. Okay, so I think it's actually working. It's just complaining that it can't find the post variable, or like the post type. Post ID doesn't exist either. What? Did I forget to save it? Cargo build. Sadly, this has to depend on Actix, otherwise it will be much faster to compile, I expect. This is like the third time that we've compiled all this stuff. At least we're not including sin and quote, which makes things a bit faster to compile. I wonder what happened to infer schema. CLI tests, print infer schema. It is in the toml file. These whole tests. So it seems they basically moved it to another crate and then somehow, I'm not sure where it's hosted, because like the GitHub link in the the repository link in the crate points to here, but I don't see it. Extern crate. Wait, what did I do? Post ID is not visible here due to private fields. Ah. Yeah, and now the only error that we get is that it can't find the post type, which makes sense because we haven't actually generated it yet. However, I think it actually makes sense to end the stream here. As you can see, it's like 10:30 where I am, and I have to get to work tomorrow, so I think I'm going to cut the stream here. So unless there's any more questions, or rather if there are any questions, just throw them at the chat right now. Otherwise, next time we continue, it might be tomorrow, I'm not entirely sure. Make sure you follow me on on Twitter. I'm gonna post there tomorrow with further details about when the next stream will be. And in case you join the stream and you missed half of it, I'm gonna be uploading the whole thing to YouTube. So the link to my YouTube channel is down below. So unless there's any further questions, I guess I will see you for the next stream. So yeah.